My parents disowned me for choosing art over law. Now my paintings sell for thousands and they can't afford a ticket to my gallery. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated my future like their personal project. In our house, destiny wasn't discovered, it was assigned. My father was a respected attorney with his name etched on the glass doors of a downtown firm. My mother came from a family of judges and scholars, the kind of people who believed that status wasn't just earned, it was inherited. From the moment I could talk, everyone seemed to know exactly who I was supposed to become. At family dinners, conversation always revolved around law, precedent, and victory. My father would recount courtroom stories like war tales, and my mother would say things like, "Someday you'll be in chambers too, wearing your father's suit." I used to nod because disagreeing felt like betrayal. Even my report cards weren't about me. They were about the family legacy. If I scored well, it was, "Our boy is following in our footsteps." If I stumbled, I could feel the weight of disappointment hanging in the silence. But when I was alone, I didn't dream of gavels and contracts. I dreamed in color, shades, textures, and movement. I'd sketch scenes on the back of legal pads when my father wasn't looking, the graphite smudging under my fingers like a guilty secret. Once my mother found a small painting I'd made of the old oak tree in our yard. She didn't even look at it before saying, "You have better things to focus on than that." Every compliment I received for debate or essay contests felt hollow because it wasn't mine, it was theirs. I wasn't being praised for who I was, but for who they needed me to be. And somewhere between their expectations and my silence, I started losing track of where I ended and where they began. That realization, quiet, painful, and terrifying, was the first crack in their perfect plan. It started quietly, like a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. I was 16 when I first picked up a paintbrush for real. My high school art teacher, Ms. Lewis, caught me doodling courtroom sketches during study hall and asked, "Why not paint something that actually matters to you?" I laughed it off at first, but she slipped me an old set of paints and said, "Just try. You'll be surprised what color can say when words can't." That night I stayed up until dawn. The house was silent, the kind of suffocating quiet that always came after my father's late-night calls from work. I laid an old bedsheet across my desk and painted the first thing that came to mind, my family's dining room table. Except in my version, every chair was empty. The light from my desk lamp flickered on the wet canvas, and for the first time in my life, I felt alive. Of course, I couldn't let them see it. I hid that painting under my mattress along with the others that followed. Every time I painted, I felt like I was doing something dangerous but necessary, like breathing in a room with no air. It didn't take long for my father to notice. He came into my room one evening after I'd forgotten to lock the door. His eyes landed on a half-finished piece propped against the wall, a portrait of him, faceless, with a gavel in one hand and chains in the other. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, voice tight with fury. "It's just an assignment," I lied. "Assignments don't mock their fathers," he snapped, tearing the canvas in half before tossing it into the trash. I stood there frozen, brush still in my hand, paint dripping onto the floor like blood. That was the night I learned that art wasn't just something they disapproved of. It was something they feared, and from that moment on, I knew I'd have to choose between being their son or being myself. By the time graduation rolled around, the tension in our house felt like a loaded gun. My father had spent the entire year bragging to his colleagues about my inevitable future in law. He'd already told people I was applying to Harvard. I hadn't corrected him, not once, too scared to see the disappointment sharpen into hatred. But as the day got closer, the secret I'd been carrying, my art school application, started eating away at me. Graduation night was supposed to be perfect. My mother bought a new dress. My father wore his favorite cufflinks, the ones shaped like tiny scales of justice. We went to a fancy restaurant afterward, one of those places where everyone whispers and the waiters move like ghosts. My father raised a glass and said, "To the future attorney of this family, our pride and legacy." Something inside me cracked. "I'm not going to Harvard," I said quietly, but the words hung in the air like an explosion. I got accepted to the Pacific Institute of Art. That's where I'm going. The table went silent. My mother blinked like she hadn't heard me right. My father's jaw tightened. "You're joking," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "I'm not." He leaned forward, eyes burning. "You think painting will feed you? That it's a career? Do you want to embarrass this family? You're throwing your life away." I could feel everyone in the restaurant staring, the air thick with humiliation. My mother whispered, "Please don't do this here." But I was done hiding. "I never asked you to build my life for me," I said. "I just wanted you to see me." My father's hand slammed on the table, rattling the silverware. "If you walk this path, you walk it alone. Don't come home looking for support when you fall." The ride home was silent. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't even look at me. Just said, "Pack your things." That night, I realized freedom sometimes starts with being thrown out of the only place you've ever known. The next morning, I stood outside my house with a single duffel bag, the door locked behind me. It wasn't raining, but the sky looked like it wanted to. My father didn't come out to say goodbye. My mother opened the door once, just long enough to leave a small envelope on the porch. Inside was a check for a few $100s and a note that read, "You'll regret this. When you're ready to come back, we'll help you start over, the right way." I tore it in half. I crashed on my friend Marcus's couch that night, surrounded by pizza boxes, cigarette smoke, and the sound of sirens from the street below. His apartment was small, the kind of place where you could hear every creak of the floorboards. But it was the first time I didn't have to hide who I was. I spent my days waiting tables at a cafe near the art school and my nights painting in the corner of Marcus's living room. Sometimes I'd fall asleep with paint on my fingers and wake up to the smell of burnt coffee and freedom. But freedom came with hunger. I skipped meals to afford brushes. Some nights I wondered if my father was right, if I'd ruined everything for a fantasy. I'd walk past law offices downtown, see men in suits my father's age laughing over lunch, and feel a sharp twist of shame in my stomach. One evening, while painting a streetlight under the flicker of Marcus's broken lamp, he said, "You know, man, I've never seen anyone fight for something this hard. You gotta make it mean something." His words stuck. Maybe this was what starting over really looked like, not running away from my family's world, but building my own from nothing. Still, every time I heard the sound of car doors outside, a small part of me hoped it was them coming to take me back. But they never did. Time became a blur of part-time jobs, unpaid exhibitions, and sleepless nights spent painting until my hands cramped. I was 21 when I sold my first piece, a moody cityscape painted on recycled cardboard, to a stranger for $50. It wasn't much, but to me, it felt like proof that I wasn't insane for believing in myself. I texted my mom that night, "I sold a painting." She didn't respond. A week later, my aunt called. Her voice was kind but careful. "Your father heard about your art thing," she said. "He told everyone at Sunday dinner that you're going through a phase. He says once you're broke, you'll come to your senses." I laughed, but it came out hollow. Every brushstroke I made after that felt heavier, like I was trying to prove them wrong with color and canvas. Months turned into years. My paintings slowly started selling online. Not enough to live comfortably, but enough to stop waiting tables. I remember the first time someone messaged me from abroad, a buyer in Paris who said my art felt like heartbreak trapped in color. I reread that message 100 times, because it was the first time someone had seen me. But the validation cut both ways. My family still refused to acknowledge any of it. My brother, now a junior partner at my father's firm, posted photos of new cars and family dinners, always with an empty chair. Where I used to sit, I found out through a cousin that my parents were telling people I'd moved abroad for work, carefully avoiding the word, artist. They were rewriting my story without me. Pretending I didn't exist was easier than admitting they'd been wrong. Still, a small, foolish part of me hoped they'd come around one day, maybe walk into one of my shows. Proud, finally understanding what this meant to me, but deep down, I knew better, because to them, I wasn't an artist. I was just their biggest disappointment with a paintbrush. It happened overnight, literally. One Friday evening, I posted a painting I'd been working on for months. It was called Inheritance. a portrait of a faceless man in a suit holding a bleeding briefcase. It was angry, emotional, and everything I'd never been able to say out loud. I uploaded it with a short caption, for the people who had to break themselves to be seen. I went to bed expecting maybe a few likes from fellow artists. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I thought it was a glitch until I saw the notification. A famous musician had reposted my painting with the caption, "This hit harder than therapy." Within hours, my page exploded, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, and messages from people saying they'd cried looking at my work. Someone called it a masterpiece born of pain. By nightfall, an art magazine had emailed asking for an interview. A New York gallery offered me a slot in their upcoming exhibition. And for the first time, my name, my real name, was being celebrated, not whispered in shame. I stared at the screen, half thrilled, half terrified. Because for the first time, my art wasn't just mine, it was public, raw, exposed. The same things my parents had mocked were now being shared across the world. That night, my phone buzzed again. A number I hadn't seen in years. "Mom," the message was short. "Your father saw the article. He's proud, but he doesn't know how to say it." I didn't know what to feel. Anger, relief, confusion. After years of silence, that was all I got. Not "I'm sorry," not "we were wrong," just a vague second-hand apology. But deep down, I felt something shift. The boy they had disowned was finally someone the world was applauding. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, were they proud of me, or just the version of me that strangers had decided was worth something? 2 weeks after the viral storm, I got a call from my mother. Her voice sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced being gentle. "Your father and I would like to have dinner," she said. "Just to talk, like family again." Every instinct screamed, "Don't go," but curiosity won. A part of me wanted to see if the people who'd once thrown me out were capable of seeing me now. We met at a high-end restaurant. Downtown, the same kind of place where my father used to introduce me as his future legacy. When I walked in, my mother stood to hug me. My father didn't. He just looked me up and down like he was inspecting a stranger. "You've made quite a name for yourself," he said. "Your work is unconventional." "Thanks," I replied. "That's kind of the point." They exchanged a look. My mother smiled tightly. "You know, some of your interviews mentioned us. Maybe keep those parts vague? People might get the wrong idea about our family." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "The wrong idea?" She continued, "You know how gossip spreads. We've spent decades building our reputation. We just want to make sure no one misinterprets things." It hit me like a punch. They weren't there to reconnect. They were there for damage control. My success had made them uncomfortable, not proud. My father added, "You're talented, no doubt. But let's be clear, your success reflects your upbringing. Good discipline comes from good parenting." I let out a laugh before I could stop myself. "You disowned me," he frowned. "We did what was necessary to teach you a lesson." The silence that followed was deafening. The waiter came, filled our glasses, and I realized I couldn't breathe in that room. So I stood, dropped enough cash to cover my meal, and said quietly, "The lesson worked. You taught me what kind of people I'll never become." Then I walked out, this time on my own terms. For a few days after that dinner, I told myself I didn't care, that walking out was power, that I'd finally proven them wrong. But the truth hit me harder when the silence came back. The fame, the recognition, the sales, it all felt hollow when the two people I'd spent my life trying to impress still looked at me like I was a stain on their family name. I stopped painting. My studio felt cold, the canvases staring back at me like they were waiting for answers I didn't have. Emails from galleries went unanswered. I told myself I was just taking a break, but deep down, I was drained. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's expression, calm, judgmental, like he'd won again by making me feel small. Marcus tried to pull me out of it. "Man, you didn't fight this hard just to quit now," he said one night, sitting on my paint-stained couch. "You showed the whole world who you are." "I showed them a lie," I muttered. "They think I'm confident, free. But I'm still that kid begging for approval. I barely ate. My apartment smelled like turpentine and stale coffee. The hum of the city outside felt distant, like life was happening without me. One night, I stumbled across an old sketchbook, bent, dusty, the one I'd hidden under my bed as a teenager. Tucked inside was a folded note in fading ink. It was from Ms. Lewis, my high school art teacher. I had forgotten it existed. The paper trembled in my hands as I read her handwriting. "You have a voice that can't be silenced. Even if they never listen, keep speaking in color." Something broke open inside me. For the first time in months, I set up a canvas. I didn't care if it was good. I didn't care who would see it. I just painted, furiously, honestly, painfully, and by the time the sun came up, I realized I hadn't thought about my parents once while doing it. That was the first real victory I'd ever felt. That sleepless night marked the start of something different. I began painting every day again, but this time it wasn't for validation or revenge. It was survival. Each stroke felt like a confession. Every layer of paint another truth I'd buried to keep my parents happy. I didn't think about exhibitions or sales. I just painted until the pain stopped buzzing in my chest. A few weeks later, one piece caught my eye. It was raw, chaotic, splashes of red and gray swirling around a single golden outline of a man walking away from a burning house. I called it Inheritance. The title came naturally. It wasn't about money or legacy anymore. It was about what I'd inherited emotionally. Guilt, silence, and the constant fear of disappointing people who never cared to understand me. When I shared it online, the reaction was explosive. People wrote essays in the comments, telling me how it made them cry, how they'd been disowned, dismissed, or forgotten too. For the first time, I wasn't just painting my pain, I was painting theirs. And that connection pulled me out of the darkness. A major gallery reached out soon after, offering me a solo exhibition right in my hometown. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. The same city where I'd been thrown out for chasing art now wanted to display my work on white walls and velvet ropes. I accepted. But this time it wasn't about proving anything. It was about reclaiming the space that once suffocated me. As I walked into the empty gallery days before the opening, the smell of fresh paint and polished floors filled the air. My canvases leaned against the walls, silent witnesses to everything I'd been through. For the first time, I didn't feel like the black sheep of my family. I felt like the artist they tried, and failed, to erase. When the gallery sent out invitations, I hesitated before adding 2 names to the list, Robert and Elaine Turner, my parents. I stared at their names on the screen for a long time before clicking send. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. A part of me wanted them to see, with their own eyes, the life I'd built without them. A week later, I got a reply. It was from my mother. Just one line. "We'd love to come, but the ticket prices are outrageous." I read it 3 times, unsure if it was sarcasm or sincerity. I finally wrote back, "They're worth what you taught me my art never was." Then I hit send and never looked again. Opening night arrived. The gallery was packed, critics, collectors, strangers clutching glasses of wine as they stared at my work like it meant something profound. The walls glowed under soft golden light. My paintings hung like scars turned into trophies. Reporters circled asking about my journey. One woman with a clipboard asked, "What inspired your collection?" I smiled and said, "Every person who told me I wasn't enough." The crowd erupted in applause, but all I could hear was the faint hum of memory, the echo of my father's voice saying, "Art doesn't feed you." I looked around the room, half expecting to see them standing in a corner, maybe proud, maybe ashamed. But they weren't there. Later that night, as the gallery lights dimmed and people drifted out, I stood alone in front of Inheritance. The gold figure walking away from the flames stared back at me, almost like he was whispering, "You made it out." I took a deep breath, realizing something I hadn't before. This night wasn't about showing them what they missed. It was about finally being okay that they'd never show up. 2 days after the gallery opening, my phone buzzed again, an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it until I saw the name that made my stomach drop. Dad. I answered, half out of habit, half out of curiosity. His tone was clipped, formal. "You've caused quite a stir," he said. People from the firm are calling me, asking if that painting of the man with the bleeding briefcase is supposed to be me. I took a slow breath. Maybe it is, I said. Or maybe it's about anyone who mistakes control for love, he scoffed. You think this is art? You're humiliating this family. We supported you, fed you, educated you, and this is how you repay us? I laughed bitterly. You disowned me, Dad. You kicked me out. Remember? There was a long pause, the kind that used to make me fold in silence when I was a kid. But not this time. You've become someone we can't even recognize, he said finally, his voice low. Good, I replied. Because the version you recognized was miserable. He tried to regain control. Don't mistake attention for success. Fame fades. Legacy lasts. Legacy? I repeated. You mean the kind that buries individuality under your name? No thanks. I'm building something that's actually mine. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he muttered, You've become someone we can't control. And I said quietly, That's the point. The line went dead. But I didn't feel angry this time, just calm. I set the phone down and looked around my studio. The sun was streaming through the window, catching the edges of a half-finished painting. It was a portrait, not of him. Not of me, but of a hand releasing a paintbrush mid-air. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to explain what it meant. I knew. And so would anyone who ever tried to cage me again. Months later, I stood in a different gallery, this one in London, walls pure white, the air thick with the hum of admiration. My work now traveled further than I ever imagined. Collectors who once ignored my emails now waited in line to shake my hand. A critic called me the voice of emotional defiance. Another called me the artist who turned rejection into currency. But none of those words mattered as much. As the quiet inside me, success didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like peace. I could finally paint without that invisible audience in my head, without wondering what my parents would think. For the first time, the silence wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. One afternoon, while setting up a new exhibit, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my mother's. Inside was a photo of my father standing in front of one of my old paintings, the first one I ever made, the dining room with empty chairs. On the back, she'd written, "We saw your latest show online. We're proud of you, even if we don't understand you." I stared at it for a long time, not crying, not smiling, just accepting. Maybe they'd never truly see me. Maybe their love would always come wrapped in conditions and confusion. But I didn't need their understanding anymore. That evening, during the opening, I stood before my final piece, a massive canvas titled Family Portrait. It showed a crowd of faceless figures behind glass, watching a single man walk away holding a paintbrush dripping gold. As the audience applauded, I whispered to myself, "You don't owe anyone the version of you they wanted." And when the lights dimmed, I realized my story had come full circle. I wasn't the boy they disowned. I wasn't their failure turned success. I was just an artist, finally painting the life that belonged entirely to me.